I'm Sarah. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about my journey to sustainable health and meaningful success. And today I just wanted to talk a little bit about my study abroad experience in Ecuador. I am posting this video on Thursday the 16th of January, which is the 4th anniversary of the day that I left for Ecuador for a trip that would change my life forever. I stayed there for 8 weeks and studied Spanish, took a couple classes, and I went with a group of 10 students and a professor, and so it was a really great experience, and it affected me very profoundly, and I learned a lot of different lessons that kind of just really shaped the way that I view the world, the way that I viewed myself and other people. So yeah, if you are coming back and you've already subscribed, welcome back. Ustedes son mi gente y los quiero mucho. And if you are here for the first time, welcome. Please consider subscribing if you want to be part of the fam, you know? So my experience in Ecuador, 8 weeks. The first week was just a lot of travel. Ecuador is a very diverse country. There's like 14 languages that are like their official languages. Spanish is most commonly used, but there's a lot of different languages, ton of different cultures. There's even different climates within Ecuador, and Ecuador is a pretty small country, but you could be in the mountains and have to wear a coat, and then a 2-hour drive and you're on the beach and you're like dying of heat stroke. So there was just a lot to absorb. And traveling was really amazing. I'm glad that I kept a journal. I kept 2 journals. I kept this journal, which is the one that I kept as an assignment from my professor. I wrote 22 journal entries in this 100% in Spanish. And then I kept this journal where I left no tea unspilled about all of the drama that was going on throughout the trip. And I'm a very descriptive journaler. So, oh my gosh, I'm a very different person than I was 4 years ago. But I had a lot of things to say in that journal. So I documented all of my emotions and all of my experiences. So the first week we traveled, we spent some time in the jungle, and just did a lot of touristy stuff. We tubed down the Napo River, and I survived. I didn't end up in Peru, and it was a grand old time. I feel like, I don't know, you could just look up Ecuador and see a lot of cool things, and my experience probably won't mean as much to you, but the lessons that I learned in Ecuador were just profound. So I spent the time that I studied in Cuenca, Ecuador, I spent with a host family. So there were 5 people in that family. It was the parents, their children who were in their mid-40s, and then their grandchild who was 19, and I was 20 at the time. And their grandson spoke English fluently, but we weren't allowed to speak English, and I followed that rule in my host family, but we did travel with 10 students from North Park University, so I think I leaned more on my English when I was around my fellow classmates, and I wish I wouldn't have done that. But yeah, it was just a great time. I loved my host family. They were really funny and they loved to laugh, and I felt really at home with them. I wish that I would have been a little bit more confident in my Spanish, or just talked and not been afraid of miscommunicating. I did learn that I needed to kind of speak up and advocate for my needs, just because I think if you're traveling to any country where, they don't live exactly like you live, or, they're not familiar with your particular needs, you really do need to speak up, because no one can read your mind. So like the first couple weeks in Ecuador, we went from like the jungle where we were only eating fruits and vegetables to the city where that wasn't as much in the diet of the host family that I was with. And so like I started feeling really sick because of the diet change. And so eventually I was able to communicate with my host family, and I didn't want to insult them because they are so generous and so nice. I didn't want to like say anything that would give them the impression that they weren't doing enough for me. They definitely were. But I eventually was able to like communicate the fact that like, oh, like, is there anywhere that I can purchase fruit or vegetables, because I'm starting to have some stomach pain because like there's just too much transition in my diet. And but them being the generous, wonderful people that they are, started implementing that into the meals that they were feeding me. So I started feeling better, and they just took care of that. And I probably would have had a lot more problems had I not just said what I needed to say to advocate for my needs. I didn't realize at the time that I really was dealing with depression. I've been dealing with depression for a really long time. I had no idea that I was. I probably still wouldn't have told you that I had some severe depression in Ecuador up until about 2 days ago, when I was reading my journal entries and could see it very clearly that I was a very sad person, just in general. But I was still dealing with binge eating disorder, so like my host family was feeding me enough, and I had enough calories to function like a normal human being, but I still had like a lot of issues and stuff, and I should have just asked for refrigeration space, like refrigerator space, so that I could keep some snacks in there, because what ended up happening was I would like purchase something, but they didn't have snack sizes of whatever I would purchase, so I would just like try to eat as much as I could of a full size thing of whatever food I was eating. And so it did not help me at all, and that was 100% my fault. Like, I don't hate myself for it, it's just I should have asked for some refrigeration space so I didn't feel like I had to binge anything. Especially because my host family was so understanding, and I was just so in my head about a lot of things. So if you're like traveling abroad, or if you're with a host family or something, just speak your needs, communicate it politely, but honestly, like, I don't think they would have had a problem, and I probably would have had a lot of an easier time if I had just said something. And then, like, as far as miscommunications are going to happen, especially if you're traveling to a country that doesn't speak your first language, or you don't speak their native language. Like, the miscommunications are going to happen, and I think you just got to be okay with it. There was one day that at the lunch table we were talking, and I was telling them that I was allergic to nuts and that I avoid eating almonds specifically. And I got the word for almonds confused with the word for Germans. So instead of saying I avoid eating almonds, I said I avoid eating Germans. And that was a very long-running joke in the family after that. But, like, it's okay. Like, the words are similar. They were alemanes versus almendras. Like, but, yeah. And then another miscommunication that I mean, it's still uncomfortable, but like, I'm walking the streets of Ecuador, not walking the streets, but I'm walking around in Ecuador as a very different appearing person. Clearly, I'm gringa as it gets. I have curly brown hair, I have green eyes, I'm much larger in stature than most people there, much taller. Even at 5'5", I was taller than a lot of people there. But I would be catcalled, but they would use the word gordita, which in Spanish is more like, hey, cutie. Like, it's still chubby, but it's not an insult. But I'm walking around thinking that all these men are shouting at me like, hey, little fat girl. And that deeply wounded me, actually. But I learned to have grace for myself and to have grace for other people, because even though catcalls, it's still rude. Like, it's still incredibly uncomfortable being someone in a foreign country, not speaking the native language, walking around alone, even though it's in the daytime, but having men call after you and then misunderstand, thinking that they're saying, hey, little fat girl. Woo! Nightmare. But yeah, something that I reflected on in one of my journals was the fact that, like, people stared at me, straight up stared at me, because I looked very different. There was one time I was standing in line at the women's restroom, and one lady, just without any, like, inhibition, she just stared at my face. She did the full body check and then just stared at my face one more time. And I don't think she was trying to be rude. She just was, like, so flabbergasted by my appearance that she just had no problem just staring straight at my face. And there were a couple times when people would walk up and approach a couple of the students in our group who were, like, tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, and they would ask to take pictures with them, like they were models or something. I don't know exactly why, but that was the treatment we received for looking very different. And something that was really interesting to look back on my journal, because like, it deeply impacted me, and it shaped the way that I viewed other people or treated people, or, I've never considered myself much of a prejudiced person, but I wrote in my journal that I hated being the minority. I hate being looked at and made to feel like I'm different, which was just a lot to reflect on, especially the fact that nobody was prejudiced against us. We didn't have any poor treatment because we were different. It was just we were different, and that in and of itself made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. It made me really evaluate my situation in the United States and how I take that for granted, or how nonchalant that is, or how casual that is, or just how apathetic I was to the treatment of others simply because they're different in some way. And that no longer was okay with me as soon as I put one foot in another person's shoes. And it wasn't even, I wasn't even discriminated against for it. It was just looking at me. And that automatically made me feel uncomfortable. So that was a new experience that was definitely uncomfortable, but for me it was necessary. I would imagine it's necessary for a lot of people, but I'm glad that I actually had the privilege of having an experience that opened my eyes to see some reality that was tough to swallow. But one thing that I know for sure is that I learned more about myself than anything. And I learned a lot about God also in Ecuador. Not that it was a religious experience really, but for myself, okay, the gordita miscommunication, like it's kind of humorous, but I actually, like, there were a lot of people who called me fat on this trip. Like, the word gorda was definitely thrown around a lot. But there was one hike that I stayed back from because I wasn't physically capable of doing the hike. So I stayed back and I talked to the bus driver for like 3 hours because they were hiking for a really long time. And the bus driver ended up like asking me why I was fat. And I'm like, why are you asking me this? And I said, you know, in the States, that's an insult. And he's like, well, that's not an insult here. That's just a descriptive word. And I think I actually even said that in my video on the skinny on being fat, that I no longer use the word fat as an insult or as a word that I tiptoe around. It's a descriptive word. But oh my gosh, I was so like devastated anytime someone described me as that. But I just kind of had a lot of personal issues in general. Let's be honest. But yeah, that was one thing that I learned about myself and actually kind of became a little bit more comfortable with myself and realized like, no, I can be attractive. People can be mesmerized by different aspects of me. Like a lot of people just stared into my eyes because my eye color. But like I can be worthy of someone's attention, but also still be fat because that's just a descriptive word. But I think the best part about Ecuador was the opportunity to see a completely different way of living, different culture, learn a different language. But it's my belief that all people are created in the image of God. And so when you experience a different culture or you just see something from a completely different point of view, you see more of God. And you get more acquainted with the full picture of God. So, in that sense, when I learned Spanish, I gained 20 million potential new friends. Like, I gained, like, that door was open to me to have deep friendships with people that I wouldn't have even been able to talk to had I not learned Spanish. But even in Ecuador, with the people that I was uncomfortable speaking with and having a full conversation with, there were a lot of times, and I documented them in my journals, where, you know, they'd be playing around for Carnival. Complete strangers would walk up and, like, dump buckets of water on us or smear paint on our faces or anything. Even one night we were, like, bar hopping and we were dressed up and they just doused us in, like, foam and water. But it was, like, pure-hearted fun with people that we didn't have to exchange a single word in order to have a human connection. And that was really beautiful. So, and I think that if you're considering traveling, something that I learned from one of the bus drivers that I talked to, I spent a lot of time with bus drivers on this trip. Because it would be like, oh, we're going to do a hike, but your lungs can't handle the altitude, so you're going to stay back and have a conversation with this bus driver. That happened several times. But I learned from one of them who just had a really, like, ambitious worldview. Like, he wanted to see things. He wanted to meet new people. And just kind of hearing from his perspective on the difficulties of traveling to the United States, and just on a purely financial perspective, the fact that I show up there with my credit card in hand and could purchase anything I wanted to purchase. I didn't say no to myself very often. and I was able to afford a lot of luxuries because it was less expensive there. But on the reverse side, if you grow up in Ecuador and you want to travel to the United States, all of a sudden your money is like gone a lot faster than normal. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's an absolute privilege to be able to go to another country and experience a different culture and learn a new language, and the things that we're exposed to in general, the things that we get to experience, not a lot of people actually get to. So even from where I stood as a broke college student, I was incredibly privileged being able to go there. So, yeah, if you're considering going, or studying abroad, or if you have the opportunity and you just think, oh, should I not? I would recommend it 100%. Your mental health is still key no matter where you go, so always take care of yourself. Just because you're traveling and you're in a foreign place and it's exciting doesn't mean that your problems just automatically leave you. So you still have to find healthy ways to wrestle with your demons. But from my perspective, I think you should definitely take any opportunity that you get to learn from a different perspective and grow your view of humanity, of God, of the world. So anyway, hopefully that was a nice little dose of love, joy, and peace. And if you have any questions or comments or anything to add to the discussion, please comment down below. Like this video if you want other people to see it, or if you really want other people to see it, you can share it. But yeah, and as always, subscribe because we have fun here. Anyway, okay. Adios.